So why don't we start, actually with a quick intro. So Marc, you introduce yourself, but why don't we go this way and tell us just in 30 seconds, not only just what you do now, but maybe your background, if you're, what you did before, if you're a technical person in your case.
Okay, I'll try. My background is, well, I come from Wikipedia. Hello, I'm from Wikipedia. I've been contributing to Wikipedia since 2004 and quickly got into also contributing to the software, MediaWiki, since 2005, and since 2008 I've been working for Wikimedia Germany as a software developer, and I'm very happy to be able to work on WikiData now. I studied computer science. I specialized in mining of semi-structured data. I guess that's enough background for now.
Okay, perfect.
Hi, I'm Richard Hutton, the CTO of nugg.ad, based here in Berlin. And for the past 4 years, I've been designing and developing data management systems for what we call arbitrary data sets. And over the first couple of years, I've been working with high latency environments, mainly using technologies like Hadoop. And in the last couple of years, I moved towards finding solutions to low latency environments for real-time analytics. And then the second part of my work over the last 4 years is to find ways of creating intelligence on the data we collected.
Perfect.
Hi, I'm Jason Krebs. I have never worked on low latency at all in any way, shape, or form, but it seems exciting. I've been on the publishing side and the technology side. I was at New York Times for quite some time on the web, Condé Nast, and started a technology company called Shorttail, and now Tremor Video is a fairly large video advertising technology company.
Spencer Reiss, or I guess I should say Reiss in this environment. I was a longtime foreign correspondent for Newsweek magazine, and in 1995 ran into the guys at Wired in San Francisco, which seemed like a lot more fun. And since by that time I was carrying about 50 pounds of assorted gear, in fact I still have my very first laptop from 1982. When people ask how can that be, it's true. And so I've been at Wired ever since. I also do a side business in events like this one somewhat, and one of them is called the Monaco Media Forum, which is coming up in November. If anybody's interested in going, show me your business card and I will get you an invitation. That's it.
And you mentioned you were CEO of Spongecell, but you want to talk about what happened before?
Oh, before Spongecell.
That you can talk about?
That was years ago. So I've been, before Spongecell, I was working on wireless security, doing a lot of like 802.11 low-level security protocol stuff. Left to do advertising because it was easier maybe, more fun. And then left Spongecell because I became really, really fascinated with data and how it was used online and how we could actually realize the promise of using data to target advertising while putting people in control of it.
Okay, terrific. So to get started, let me take it back to the basics a little bit. So we've been talking about data all day. But the interesting thing about big data is this kind of newish term that has been around for a few years. But when you think about it, a lot of big data techniques have been around for as long as computers have existed. I mean, the whole concept of having data, storing data, actually having too much data that you can actually process is a natural problem since computers have existed, right? So what's different this time around? Why are we suddenly seeing this acceleration in innovation? What are the drivers? What are the trends? What do you guys see? And what are the underlying reasons for it? Anyway.
Sure. So I guess from the advertising side, it's really liquidity in the market. So 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago, Google started doing the ad exchange, which added a lot of liquidity to the market. So people could actually use data to target ads very easily with addressable media. So I think that's the big driver on the advertising side.
Liquidity.
Overall, I'd say three things. Ever more ubiquitous devices with collecting data, networks that cheaply connect them to each other and to databases, and the plummeting cost of storing things. And those three things may have made it, it's just faster, cheaper, better. And when you have those three things, you get explosions. I think that's what we've got.
Yeah, whenever you take such a large amount, a company's going to spend a certain amount of their sales on advertising. And from our perspective, if that advertising was going to be constricted by advertisers saying they could spend less money and be more effective, the agencies started getting hurt. So when an ad agency's profit margin started going down because they didn't have the software and they were taken out of the loop by the first generation of ad networks from 90s to the early 2000s, that's when everything started to really change. And it kind of hit when data started becoming more accessible and being able to store more and do more things with it. So that's why then all of the venture capital money started funding all of that. So you have billions of dollars of venture funding trying to address this problem, and most of the agencies are spending this money saying, you know, we need more and more and more to service the clients.
From a technical standpoint, maybe?
Yeah, from a technical standpoint, I think reduction in hardware costs has been a massive factor. But I think the invention of probably one of the most important inventions was the distributed file system, which was pioneered from Google. And this meant that you could store data in its rawest form. And rawest form means that it's not derived from somewhere else. So you can store all of this raw data, ideally, with timestamps. And that gives you a lot of flexibility to ask different questions on your data. And then if you facilitate that with the computation frameworks like MapReduce, which is available to anyone really through Hadoop, that's been a sort of huge driver in what we can do. And as we move sort of forward, as it were, we have now better technology solutions for handling streaming activity through technologies like Kafka and Storm. So I think we're only halfway on the journey to big data.
Halfway?
Yeah, I think I have to agree that the important bit is the access to tools, and of course also that the fact that storage got much cheaper. And I think open source again plays a very, very important role, just as web hosting was at some point, well, basically became available to the masses because it became very cheap, not only to get it, but basically to offer it, because you didn't have to pay huge amounts of money to, I don't know, buy the license for the software you had to use for this. And I think the same thing is now happening with big data, with data processing.
Great. So liquidity, open source, better tools, more data, different type of data. So what's the flip side? So what's limiting the explosion of innovation in big data right now? Is that data scientists? Is that different processes about making decisions based on data? Again, we don't necessarily have to follow this order, but whoever wants to start.
I think a lot of it is so much of change does happen in stages, and consumer change has happened so much more dramatically than businesses can adapt. Right? I think if anyone would have thought that there would have been 60 million tablets, probably more than that already now in the US alone, just 2 years ago from none, nobody was prepared for that. So the explosion of people using different media consumption devices the catch-up factor is still yet to come in terms of how people are responding to that.
I'll be flip and say I'm not sure there are any restrictions. I don't notice anything getting in the way of anything much.
Yeah, it's just humans.
I mean,
if you get rid of the humans, everything would be fine.
It's going full speed ahead. I mean,
that's coming.
As far as I can see, I mean, occasionally, somebody, Switzerland will say, "Oh, you can't use Google Street View." Wow. I mean, what's that? In the net, it's going as fast as it can anyway.
Right. I mean, humans are, I wouldn't say the limiting factor, but I think the most important factor in any kind of progress, because the progress cannot happen faster than people understand it. And understanding, not on an individual base, but I mean, for a whole, society or industry to understand how something works, it takes a while. with new database technologies, you have the people who are basically, well, no, we don't need that, we don't want that, we stick to the stuff we know. And on the other hand, you have the, well, we want to be buzzword compatible, we use, I don't know, everything at once and try everything. And neither of that actually works, right? It takes a few years to sort out what's actually the right tool for what.
Right, right. So let's talk about data scientists maybe as a, for a second as a potential limiting factor. I don't know if your businesses, or maybe in your business specifically, you have to hire those guys. Can somebody talk about this? And first, what is a data scientist? I guess we touched upon it a little bit. And what do they do? How do you find them? And is not finding them an issue? Or do you use data scientists? Do you?
Yeah, we do use data scientists. It would be a bit difficult otherwise
right.
to run our business. I think that it's no different from traditional sort of times. We had data analysts, and they were working on CRM systems, and they were just one single repository of information, maybe a sales ledger, to look at what offices are generating good revenue. I think that with the data scientists, they tend to look at different sources of information and run through different experiments and different cycles and try different hunches. And on the development side, we try to provide them with the processing they need to be able to answer these questions that they want from the data. I can't really answer it any other way.
So do you have any problems finding them? So if the answer is no, you're in an extraordinary strong position compared to anybody in the US.
I think that finding high-quality individuals in any discipline is never easy, whether it's a data scientist or a developer. But I would say that it's, in terms of skill sets, it's probably one of the biggest gaps at the moment.
Right.
I think the problem is that data scientists don't know that they're data scientists. You know what I mean? Like the people that you're looking for, either they're coming out of advertising or they're coming out of research, they would never call themselves a data scientist. So it's really more about finding, I think any time you're at a startup and you're looking for the right people, the right people don't know that it's them,
Yeah, we had to open up an office in Singapore to continue to grow our talent base and make sure that we had those people. And that's exactly right, is that you could even look at the flip side of it. They'd say, well, if you're engineering or data, let's just say they're a genius, you don't think, well, I'm going to go into advertising and there's a problem in advertising I'm going to solve, because that certainly is always thought of, that's a horrible thing. It's these terrible banners and nobody likes them, and why would I want to do that when I could solve global warming with data, right? Global warming or advertising, I think you're going to not find a real call there. But when you talk about what the real opportunity is, then you're able to, and how this does affect the global economy, and then you have consumers' attention time, because everyone is a consumer of media, right? And everyone has these devices, and everyone wants them to get better. So that's when you're able to get the right talent to understand the problem.
Mm-hmm. And I guess to your point, data scientists don't know they exist because the term did not exist, 3 years ago.
Right.
In your business, what about senior leadership? Whenever you try to sell a technology, sell a concept, talk about data science to people in larger corporations that have to make decisions, are they at the stage of evangelization where they buy in the concept of big data and they're willing to start making decisions based on data as opposed to intuition or experience?
I can say with Deutsche Post,
yes.
Not to push Deutsche Post, but I would say yes. And they start to look at the possibilities, to look at new business models and to utilize more of the information that they have. And I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago where it was like, could you give us some of your experiences and what you discovered? And so that information could be taken and then communicated to other management in other sectors.
Yeah, again, it's a human factor in this. I mean, change is hard for some people. When you're buying advertising from somebody, if you're a high-end fashion advertiser, you might be buying advertising from the same person for the past 20 years. And if the consumption that person then is selling you, is no longer keeping track with the new consumption model, you have to make a very emotional decision to stop giving that person money and move it over here. And it's not just that friendship, of course, that you have in a business relationship, which we know business and friendship, you should separate them, but these are hard, these are long-standing relationships. If you move money out of here and move it over to here, who's going to take you to Milan for the fashion awards? Because over here, if you spent that money, you were going to Milan once a year for the shows.
But you'll get invited to Google Zeitgeist, you see.
There you go. So you have that, and you know the entrenchment of media decision makers and all types of decision making, not just media, right? I mean this goes on for all sorts of procurement for a big company. You're used to doing it a certain way, and if a new company comes in and says, "I've got a better way," then you're disrupting that flow of all of the decisions that happen in that company. So it's not very easy to come by.
Do you think it's an industry-specific thing? Is that a generational? Is that just fundamentally human? Meaning, are the sort of 25-year-olds, I guess they don't make decisions in those companies, but that grew up on Facebook, are they more willing to look at the data because they've been living in the data world of their lives? Or
look, I don't know what happens over here. I assume everyone. I don't know how different the business is. We certainly have our businesses here, and there's a lot of entertainment that goes on. And you hear, I don't know if this is new to you, but you'll hear a silly phrase that happens in the States. You ever hear of a blue jean party? Does anyone know what a blue jean party is? So a couple of years ago, when this started coming, companies would take the 25-year-old decision makers at ad agencies and go and have a party at a custom blue jean maker office, and everyone got a custom pair of blue jeans made for themselves.
Do they have like the company logo on them?
No, thank goodness. No.
The expression I've heard is poverty elite, because when you're 25 in those agencies, you make absolutely nothing.
That's right.
But you get taken to all the nice parties.
That's right. So so this grafting society and the part of entitlements for business, that's no different than the 50-year-old, as I mentioned, that the brand manager at an A-level fashion house spends money with publications because they take them to Milan every year. They take them to Paris for the runway show.
In fact, at least anecdotally, and I'm sure it's true, I have heard from many people that one of the problems in the ad industry is that salary structures, have been in place for quite a while, and they're fairly traditional. A good data mining engineer can get a lot more, and it creates problems when you have in an org chart some guy who they're looking at the org chart, what's him down there making $150,000, when this guy over here, middle manager, is only making 120. And that is a problem right there, and causes people not to get hired. And as the agencies have had to sort of digitize themselves, they have to try to fill those spots, and HR comes back and says, we can't fill that spot for what you're offering.
So otherwise they go to Google or Facebook.
Right, yeah, that's who they're competing.
Does pay that. I'd say in terms of when we're speaking to clients and investors even, 12 months ago it was, oh yeah, I know about big data, and that's really important. Now it's, okay, I understand what it means for my business. And that's been, 6 months of change, and it's actually phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. I guess while everyone's crying, though, the one good thing is the ROI. In an industry, particularly advertising, where ROI really was a kind of vague thing, not well measured, most of the very data-specific activities are very measurable, and you can show the lift. It's not panels and surveys that have smoke and mirrors all over the place. You'll just see the needle go, and so I think that's one big advantage of data.
Look, there's a pretty well-known advertising executive of one of the major television sales houses in the States who said he's pretty certain that 30% of the $70 billion that's spent in TV in the United States, 30% of that time is bought because a decision maker's spouse or loved one likes watching that show. So they could be sitting there and watching, and then they know they work on that brand, and when the commercial comes up, oh yeah, I did that. That's mine. And their loved one is watching it on the couch with them and say, oh, that's what you do. 30%. So that's the when I say, if we just got rid of the humans, except everyone in this room, of course, we'd all be fine. Then the data would truly show, but you have these entrenchments, you have these things. And believe me, I'm not crying, I'm just giving the realities. We have a expense budget too. We have season tickets to the Knicks. We take people to shows, and the clients who you work with. Every business does that, but those are some of the things that you're playing both sides of the fence.
But that really speaks to the power of data, right? Because in broadcast, there's almost zero measurement. You have surveys, and everybody knows about the efficacy of stated preferences. So I mean, when we're talking about digital, you can actually use data to measure those results. And so I think that's one of the reasons why the 25-year-old guy gets $150K at an agency, because he can actually make better decisions than an executive can, because he uses data to make them.
Well, I think they have great. I'm not going to push back. I'll just say the flip side is that they have great global data, the GRP, if everyone knows about that, and when they hit those numbers, it's not incredibly scientific. It's basically like second grade math. It's long division. But they know when they hit a certain amount, when Mars and Wrigley or Procter & Gamble, if they hit those amounts, as rudimentary as they are, they know how many cases get shipped from their warehouses, right? So we think they're measuring the wrong thing, but if they go up or down on that, they know that the increment, we sold less gum because we dropped a couple of GRPs. Whether it's right or wrong, they've been using that for the past 50 years. And that's when we're trying to go in and say all these things, because look, I'm a key data guy, and we talk about that all the time. But they say, look, I know this, I see this, and why should I change? Because I've been doing this for so long, and there's the branding aspect. Direct response is different. Clicks, let's put that over here. Click-through advertising, and if you get a click, you can show quantifiable. It's a direct response to somebody buys something done. But getting someone to think that your gum is tastier than your competitor's gum, that's not a click-through based world, right? That's where you need heavy data to be able to say, okay, we did this ad, make a difference.
Yeah, but you can still measure that a lot better in digital than you can.
Oh, 100%. No, I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying like the numbers that they have. When they spend $10 million on TV, they know they get this many GRPs, this many points. We know last year when we did that, this is how many cases we shipped.
Right,
and they'll know if they could just rubber stamp this next year's plan, they'll get that again.
And then they're going to lose, the agency's going to lose the business to when they can do it for $5 million.
Right.
Because they can measure.
That's right. When the person who's making that decision leaves his job or decides to make a big risk and say, I'm going to stop the convention that's been moving for this company for the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years and do something a little bit differently. Instead of, let's move 2% of our money to digital. Let's move 3% this year. We're doubling it by 50%. We're from 2 to 3%. So you have incremental change.
The famous quip that they make, economics makes progress one academic funeral at a time. And that's, right. I think, true, and not just at economics. I think it's true in a lot of fields. Yeah.
Look, CMOs.
Unless you have things like what's happening now in the newspaper business where literally the building's on fire and people are jumping out the windows, and then you get faster change, but probably too late.
Find a CMO that doesn't have a real hard line into the CFO of their organization these days, right? I mean, it is, you are talking week by week. How much money is being spent? Are the sales numbers being hit? No matter what the industry.
Yeah. It's actually very interesting. I don't know what your experience is, but that CMOs actually have become the purchasers of big data much more than CIOs. I mean, I don't know if that's, I guess you guys sell to CMOs presumably.
I'm sure nugg.ad has seen it, which is why we're in this gorgeous hotel with all this fancy food.
Okay, so before moving on to the next question, I should say that you guys should feel free to ask any question you want at any time. It's not meant to be just us here. So I think this mic's passing by, so whenever you want, and we don't have to have the questions at the end. Let's talk about disruption on a per industry basis. So, marketing and advertising has been at the forefront of disruption in big data, financial services to some extent as well. Where do you see the disruption accelerating? Is it what new industries are being disrupted, or are likely candidates to be disrupted?
It's medical data. Medical? Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of my friends either in New York or San Francisco are super psyched to be working on how to make people's lives better with data. I think it's a much stronger calling than when I try to hire them to work on advertising. So yeah, I would say there's huge promise there, just in terms of being able to measure the efficacy of certain treatments, and it's.
I would say automotive.
That was mine, yeah.
Was it? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead. No, I want to hear.
You said it first.
I want to hear your version.
Well, I mean, in Berlin you have Drive Now, which is this concept of car sharing, which is a really good concept that you use your app to find a car that's available. So it's like changing the paradigm of car sharing, as it were, which means that you don't need to invest in buying this one expensive item, that you share it with a number of people, which means that the resources become more efficient. And they're using data to optimize the locations of where the cars are. I think that's a cool thing, and one that's already just been rolled out over the last few months.
Oh, good. Then I'm going to double down. I'm at driverless cars, which are a huge data problem just at the operational level, because they're not autonomous vehicles. I mean, they need to know what environment they're in down to a very low level. But secondly, when you start to think about it, wow, as soon as you've got a driverless car, there's never any reason to park it. This goes with what you were saying about sharing. In other words, the car just drops you off and then shuttles off to the next guy, and it drives itself over there. It just goes and gets them. And there was a story in the Wall Street Journal, a guy named Dan Neal, their automotive writer, about 2 Sundays ago, that was just beyond amazing. He'd went in a BMW around a racetrack at 180 miles an hour without touching the steering wheel. And this car, it can repeat that just it can go after lap after lap after lap, never deviating, nothing ever changed. These are massive data problems. And he flatly predicted that in 25 years, driving over to the mall by yourself will be as weird as riding on a mule, was his analogy. And so anyway, I recommend the story, and that's my thought.
Got a question?
Hello. Yeah, I think the Drive Now is a great example for showing what this is about, really, innovation from data, because the ones that came up with that is BMW and Daimler Chrysler, or Mercedes-Benz with Car2Go. And they invented this because the paradigm shift is with the users, and they've seen from their data that people buy less cars because the ownership of a car is more a burden than something that really is evolving to be more in future. So they looked into that, and that's the interesting thing to it, also to the data, because the data sometimes sits not really sits in their business really, but it's around the whole ecosystem of car ownership and automotive and mobility and stuff like that. So to look only at one owns data, like the own website, sometimes doesn't help you and solve the problem and to innovate. You need to look, what do people do before? What do people after? And that's in the sum delivers the data that is really catering for innovation. And that's the interesting thing about the Car2Go and Drive Now example, because it's something different than what BMW did before. So just wanted to stress that, because it's about innovation here. I didn't hear so much around that topic so far.
Thank you.
Behind you, Matt.
This one over there.
Thanks. Two different types of data emerge, I believe, and I would like to get the perspective of the panel on that. First one is definitely Internet of Things, embedded sensors, stuff like that. That's going to be huge, and it already kind of started. How many sensors do you have in your mobile these days? It's pretty amazing. Not that much is being utilized as such. Second, 3D printing. Way out there, I know, but still, actually the data that's connected with the devices, with the designs, what kind of role is that to play? I don't know yet, but I would love to get the perspective here.
So let's try let's catch it. Let's start with the Internet of Things, actually, which was going to be one of my next questions. So it's actually interesting from a US perspective. I know it's like something that we barely talk about, and Europe seems to be so much in advance compared to the US. But anyway, what are your what are your thoughts in terms of what this enables, whether it's going to take off, whether that's something that's helping any of your businesses or completely irrelevant?
It's not really core to our business right now, the Internet of Things, having other machines talk to each other. I mean, it's, we've been waiting for the refrigerator that orders your milk and eggs automatically for like 20 years now. I don't know how relevant that's really going to be. I'm still of a generation where coming home from college and watching my parents' VCR flash 12 o'clock still for a year or two. But yet now my parents are dramatically, it's an awful word, but on email, right? Very devourers of new media and information. So whether these devices are now going to take over and people can use different things. I mean, I think things like CrossFit like Fitbands and Nike Fit, those things are kind of interesting. Or those device, it's really more device to human. Do cars still, you see it in car ads, right? If a car breaks, if it's getting too close to another car, that's, machine to machine. I don't know how many other practical things while thinking
Nest.
about it.
It's got a Nest.
Yeah.
Very popular.
Yeah, I also think that the Internet of Things is not something very general, not something like the web or something, but we will see very specific applications of this kind of technology. But I would like to mention something else. I think one thing that will really change due to the availability of data, of open data, is journalism. Data-driven journalism is something I think that is actually going to take off quite a bit in the next couple of years. Once, newspapers and journalists realize more how much you can actually get from that very fast. Until now it was up to researchers to tell you after a few years, well, the statistics from that election in that country looked a bit fishy. Well, now we can do that in a couple of hours, and journalists will. So I think this will actually change quite a bit.
Okay.
And that actually ties in with the research bit. I think if we see more data published from raw research instead of just papers results, but the raw data, that again has a huge potential. Though I don't really know if there is enough drive there yet to actually make it happen. But that's something that will basically enable a lot of data-driven things. Journalism, for instance.
Yeah, it's interesting. Absolutely, it's interesting how the role of a journalist has evolved, right? From being initially a collector of data, being the person that's somewhere that collects the data, to whether that's in written form or through photographs, to now becoming an analyst to a large extent, right? That's almost like a data scientist for news. Whatever.
You're flattering the profession by calling them analysts. Most journalists barely. There was a brief period when smart people became journalists, and it's mostly over.
When was that?
Right after you got in?
Kind of, yeah. The 70s, famously, all the president's men was the supposed, and suddenly you had Ivy League graduates and things going into journalism, and it's now gone back because the salaries aren't there. You can't make any money. And so you get either very, very dedicated, inspired people, or some of the nonprofits, ProPublica, where they get some money. There you'll see, but then they're becoming more like analysts. They're becoming think tank people and not classic journalists doing what most people would think of as journalism.
Well, the new version now are the YouTube personalities, right? I mean, people now can do that, and they're creating content hourly, if certainly daily, and they are making money off of page views, right? I mean, and the quality, whether it's your cup
analysis either.
Right. Depends on how deep you want to go.
I actually had a question for these guys. What about bad data? In other words, wrong. Twitter followers turn out to be 30 or 40% fake, phantom clicks, spam, gaming, all that stuff. Is that an issue for you guys?
Well, I can talk about fake data in the case of Wikipedia, of course. Well, that's people just adding crap as basically standard operations, right? So the only control we have there is a kind of social control, and which works surprisingly well. It doesn't always work, and we basically hope and expect that it also works for data with WikiData. It always depends on where your data comes from, right? If it is just individual data entries or individual clicks or something, it is pretty hard to keep on top of that. If you get huge wads of data from a source where you can actually assess the credibility of the source and kind of hope that you can infer that the data is trustworthy or not, that makes things a bit easier.
I think data actually fixes a lot of the problems of bad data, right? So I mean, it used to have circulation numbers that were being faked, and you could never measure how much traffic a newspaper got. And so you would never even think to guess that 40% of the traffic or 40% of the followers that you had somewhere were faked. But now you can actually measure it and find that out.
There's a question.
And back to data journalism, that's actually interesting how, for all forms of journalism, how the fact that you can track what people read, don't read, impacts. Probably not for you, but how some journalists confess that they measure the success in whether an article makes the most emailed list or the most, the highest number of retweets.
That's because their mother's sitting there emailing it to her.
True story. At the New York Times, when I was almost ready to hit send to a couple of very important columnists at the New York Times, what their views were on the website, my boss just happened to come in. I told him I was going to send it out to some of the editors, and he said, if you hit the send button, you are fired. And this was 2004. Where that information was just not yet ready to be handled by a print journalist, right? They're in their mind, it gets in the paper, and it goes out to as many people as is audited and is read by, and then that was it. No one ever said, well, somebody turned to A3 and read your story, but they didn't turn to A6.
Yeah, but boy, has those ties.
That's right. So this
now they've got Chartbeat.
Right. Yeah. Now you know every time.
Was driving a dashboard and changing headlines in midstream because they're not getting enough hits.
Yeah. And that's the risk, though, because data becomes entertainment instead of actually informing you about something.
Well, but I mean, for the editors, it's really becoming a modern online editor now sits there with this dashboard, looking at how his stories are doing, and they will literally change a headline that isn't performing up to the and they're getting, this is real time. They can watch at any minute who's on everything and whether they're reading down through the story, the whole thing. And that's all data powered.
Maybe interesting to some. Wikimedia actually has a similar problem during their fundraiser, right? Wikimedia is financed nearly exclusively by very small donations. The average donation, I think, is $32 by hundreds and thousands of people. And it's all basically raised during 6 weeks of fundraising during December and January, using banner ads in Wikipedia and in other sites. And sitting there, watching these numbers come in, tweaking the images, making the guy look from left to right or right to left, and changing the wording, and after an hour, seeing how that changed the numbers is actually quite fascinating. I worked for that for the German bits. I worked on that for a couple of years, and it's kind of tedious, especially for people like me. I mean, I'm a software developer. I don't know anything about that stuff, right? But it's also fascinating. It's quite cool.
Thank you. Question?
So just which now seems as a follow-up. So we talked about like new things that are being advertised, new outlets where advertising are placed, but at the beginning we saw WikiData, and we talk about Wikipedia now. So why don't we see advertising on Wikipedia? Why don't we see the way we see advertorials? Why don't we see sponsored stories on Wikipedia? Why don't we see this kind of stuff?
The answer is pretty simple, because then Wikipedia would not exist. Because people do not like to donate their knowledge and time to an entity that makes money with it. It doesn't work. People actually, maybe a short anecdote. I think it was 2002 when this was considered. Basically, Bomis, the entity that gave birth to the very, very first version of Wikipedia, they basically ran out of money, .com bubble burst and all this kind of stuff. And they didn't want to finance the project anymore. And so they thought about how to finance it, and they thought about adding advertisement, and they talked about it a little bit too loudly, which led to the Spanish community immediately completely leaving and forking the project. And there was a pretty big outcry in Germany too. And they basically just, this is what made the Wikimedia Foundation happen, because then they said, okay, we won't do that, we go non-profit, we live off donations, so the project stays alive.
It's so funny, I've got like almost the exact opposite answer, and I'm so intrigued by that. You work, and I'm sorry my analogs are mostly US based, but a company like Gawker Media in the US, so much of what they do is driven by consumers writing in, and it's a flood of user comments to it, right, where they're contributing. And then the advertisers then are the ones who say, I don't want to be next to that user-generated crap, because it's not professional and you can't control it, right? I would never, an advertiser deciding they want to sponsor something that's, brought in by consumers, again, that's starting to change now, because the advertisers are agreeing that they just can't hold this back anymore, and then the word social was invented. And now it's fantastic. Now advertisers can't get enough of things that are crowdsourced and consumers doing it, right? Yeah, if they're curating. Yeah, that's right. If it's a person is going to like that.
It's the audience. Like, I mean, look at Facebook and Twitter. That's what people are doing. Is they're generating content, which is then monetized by Facebook, which is now 50 billion or whatever they're down to now.
There's another.
Okay, as this panel is about innovation, I would like to force you guys to talk a little bit into that direction, and especially as we heard the two tracks about privacy and relevance before. My question is, which kind of big innovation do you see in this area? So I would say the recommendation engine discussion, for example, we had, or even in the field of privacy. Do you see something? Do you see this fueling innovation in a sense in the near future? Yeah, I would be interested in that.
I can take sort of a self-serving stab at that. I mean, we're working on software to allow consumers to control the information that's shared with advertisers. And so I think that as people become more aware of how their information is used to serve ads to them, to use the Facebook example again, I think you look at Google, you type in a search and then you see an ad that's correlated with that. I think that as people begin to take control of their own data, you'll start to see a lot of changes in the advertising industry. You'll start to see a lot better ads, and people will actually be able to capture some of the value for themselves.
So maybe to build on that question, that was actually going to be one of my next questions. So, what are sort of your favorites in terms of startups doing interesting things, whether here or the US, which are truly disrupting industries, maybe your industry? Any favorites, sort of big data companies or data-driven companies?
Well, Spencer riffed on it for a second. Nest. I think it's just kind of fascinating. I don't know. Does anyone even know what that is? It's and you could probably do a better job. I mean, it's
a thermostat in your house that is Wi-Fi enabled and also connected to the internet. So, for instance, like right now, I could pull up my app and turn off the heat if I forgot to when I left. You can do anything you want from any connected device.
And it goes, and that's right. And it goes so much. The data to data, the machine to machine, it could regulate your heat every 5 minutes or your air based on the cost of that energy.
It has a learning function as well. Right. If you go in at the same time every day, turn the thermostat up or down, it'll learn, that's what you like to do. It knows when you're home. If there's no one home, it puts the temperature down to 50. If it doesn't detect motion, there's a motion detector, and it's got all kinds of cool stuff.
So all that,
weather connected.
No one has ever been able to make a choice about the energy that comes into your home, right? Unless you live on a farm and you could put a turbine up, or if you think you have a big enough roof space and you could have solar power, right? You can't choose that you want to have gas versus electric, or water-driven electric versus coal-driven electric, right? You don't have those choices. So energy is something, and that's just probably the tip of the iceberg of what is going to happen. But that's something that's disrupting.
And somebody was asking about Internet of Things earlier, and I was mentioning that the US is just sort of catching on to this. I mean, not that it exists in a very advanced form in here or in other parts, but the beauty of Nest is that it's also single-handedly getting an entire country, or at least an entire tech ecosystem in the country, excited about the possibilities of the Internet of Things.
And I think it's really interesting when data can impact people's behavior, right?
Yep.
So when you can actually show people information very quickly and very relevantly, it can impact the way they behave. And there's one company that's doing something in healthcare in the States called Dabo, and all they're doing is basically sharing information among doctors and allowing doctors to see what procedures work and what treatments work, and just the sharing of that data and the sharing of that information is going to change doctors' behavior, which is going to hopefully improve people's lives.
The co-founder of our company gave me one when I asked him that question. It was called Farmerall, and he said it was Farmerall, Farmer OL, because the amount the fertilizer and water and seed and things like that, the use of big data has not really been driven. It's been driven by huge companies and a couple of huge companies, global companies, in the farming industry. And I promised him I would say that his name is Wyket Lau, and he's fascinating. If you hit him up on Twitter, I promised I'd get him at least one new Twitter follower from here. Wyket Lau. He's a pretty innovative guy. Wyket, W-A-I-K-I-T, Lau.
Okay. Maybe from a European perspective, some of the most exciting European sort of big data startups, or not. There's companies in Europe that I personally, I'm very impressed with, like Wonga, for example, basically using big data to sort of reinvent an industry, whether, I know it's controversial to some extent, but having an entire business model revolve around whether you can actually process big data in an efficient manner so that you can determine whether somebody's creditworthy or not. I think it's very interesting, but I don't know, you may have others.
Yeah, I like this one, Wonga.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
It's for short-term loan payments.
Yeah, it's like payday loans, but basically they give loans to people that would not otherwise be eligible for loans because they process big data at scale to establish whether those people, based on lots of things, like including their Facebook and LinkedIn, that type of thing, have a network that actually makes them, enables a company to determine that they're more likely to repay than one would have thought had they just looked at their credit score.
The business is quite cool because it's working on short-term loans that when it goes bad, they can always retrain very quickly so they can remove this sort of bad debt problem.
Yep.
Is it peer-to-peer or is it an institution lending?
No, it's an institution. It's from the company. Peer-to-peer is interesting as well. I think it's less just purely data-driven. It's more crowd power.
Speaking of peer-to-peer, I can think of a couple of things, but neither of them is actually big data. It's more like it is information sharing. One very interesting project, I think, is Sneapedia.
Is what?
SNIpedia. Sneapedia.
Okay.
The idea is that a lot of people these days have their genome analyzed and get a handful of markers. I think the most famous company doing this is 23andMe. There's a handful of others. I don't remember the names. So basically, you send in a sample, you get back values for 120 markers. But what do they mean? So what this project is about, it's basically it's a wiki that collects information about these markers, and tries also to mine PubMed and other places for current publications on these issues. And well, basically, anyone is welcome to contribute to that and to consolidate the information about the individual markers. I think this is pretty. Well, it's empowering, right? It's empowering to people to actually collect and find and curate the knowledge about these things. And something else entirely, which has caused very small, disturbance in the force in Germany, I think, is an app called MyTaxi. MyTaxi,
yeah.
you know that the idea is basically that I have an app on my phone, the taxi driver has an app on his phone,
yep.
And we connect, cutting out the big taxi company, the big, I don't know what you call the taxi central.
Yep.
That is definitely a disruptive business model. It's not big data processing, but it shows what communication technologies can do.
Okay, very cool.
In the States, it's called Uber. They have it just recently, probably a phenomenon in the past 6 to 9 months. Same thing.
Absolutely. So we started talking about personal data capture, objects. What do you guys think about all of this? So it was like this movement that's been around that actually started in California called the Quantified Self, which is, started as a very quirky thing where a bunch of hyper data geeks would get together and figure out ways to sort of reverse engineer themselves, capture all sorts of data about, about themselves and basically change their lives based on that. Then the next wave of this has been the creation of the Jawbones and Fitbit and all the things. Where do you guys, in which sort of camp do you fall? Do you think it's something that's exciting for now, but fundamentally a geeky thing that's never going to spread to the overall public, or is that one of the next big sort of disruptive, innovative trends?
I think the Nike have been an interesting company in this space and more recently is you have the Fuel Band, which is about setting yourself goals. And that's a great piece of technology because setting yourself goals is one of those intrinsic rewards that makes us happy. So using our data to make us happy I think is a great thing. Unfortunately, you can't buy it in Germany because Nike can't fulfill their production requirements. So I guess it's probably not just a geek thing. And I think that we're all changing in terms of how we use data and what we want to use as we move from Generation X to Generation Y.
Mm-hmm. People love to see information about themselves, They always check Facebook to see what people said about them. And I think this quantified self is just another iteration on that. And I think it's great because the quicker the feedback loop, the bigger the opportunity is to change people's behavior. So when you go home with your Fitbit and you see how many calories you burned because you walked up the stairs at work instead of taking the elevator, that's actually going to be a positive reinforcement and something that could never happen before you could measure it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, living in New York City, in the United States, there's the phenomenon of the fuel band and Fitbit and these things. It's kind of counterintuitive to the rate of obesity in the United States, which is still skyrocketing. So bad even that, I don't know if you guys know this, but the mayor of New York City has passed a resolution that you cannot buy sugary soft drinks more than 24 ounces. So it will be against the law for companies come March
Europe,
to
no one's
sell.
ever even seen a 24-ounce glass.
Yeah, I mean, it is obscene. I mean, I am the ugly American. Yeah, you shouldn't need any more than that. But it will be against law. At stores you can get a soda that's like the size of a gallon with a straw in it. It's disgusting, but it's freedom of choice, right? So that aspect of people, you can't create incentives, and our whole society is kind of perverse. I mean, you have to legislate against it. My personal ambition would be, if I could knock out 10 pull-ups in a restaurant, I should be able to order the 36-ounce soda. And there should be an incentive for me to be able to buy whatever I want versus the government penalizing people or saying you cannot do this. So, which again, I don't know. Right, yeah, it'll be fascinating to see how this plays out. It passed, it launches in March.
By the way, it's his boss.
That's true.
Yes.
That's true.
Mr. Mayor Bloomberg.
So I mean, I don't know how that rectifies with the where people want to get because the only example of this is the fuel band one, right? I mean, most Nikes were sold to people, people wearing $100 shoes who could barely walk up a flight of steps, let alone doing the amount of people that can do this and want to keep track.
Actually,
of
there's
themselves.
another whole stream of this, which is heart patients and people on all kinds of medical situations where either you want to be monitoring what's happening to them, or administering dosages of drugs, and when you hook it up with a cell phone, it becomes very easy, because then suddenly you can have your heart guy walking around with an implanted device, talking Bluetooth to his phone and sending data back to the doctor in the hospital, so they have a constant stream. And I mean, this is actually happening now. I mean, if the guy has a heart attack, they have a complete record of everything the preceding 3 or 4 hours, which is apparently a very useful thing to have. And so I think we'll see more and more of that, especially aging populations in the West, blah, blah, blah.
I mean, that's a great use of data, is actually being able to predict heart attacks before they can happen. Because you can actually, and a friend of mine did a startup on this, and I can't remember its name, unfortunately, I would name check it, but it's actually able to predict 75% of the heart attacks that happen in hospitals before they happen because of trend analysis and looking at similar people that had heart attacks as well. So I think that's a fantastic use of data.
Since we said bad things about Bloomberg, let me use one good example of predictive analytics in New York. So one thing that he does right is that the New York Open Data Service uses predictive analysis to predict where fires are the most likely to occur based on code violation, as well as a history of the buildings and how old they are and what they're built on, with pretty high accuracy. Anyway, sorry I interrupted you.
I want to go into a different direction. I think it is quite interesting to see that people don't like to be monitored, right? People try to protect their privacy. People don't want to be tracked, but people love to tell other people about themselves. So this is kind of,
that's right.
It's kind of weird. So you try not to be tracked, but at the same time, you take a photo of your lunch and put it on Instagram and go to Foursquare and tell everyone when you have been where and with whom. Well, I think this is actually a good thing, as long as I actually can control what kind of data I emit and at least can see what is happening, what everyone is seeing. So basically, I can, as long as I can control what other people's picture of me will be based on the data they get from me. Basically, I mean, checking myself in the mirror before I go out, same thing, right? I want to be in control of the image I project. And I think this is a very important fact to keep in mind.
Can we talk about things we'd like to see?
Absolutely. In terms of innovation. And
I have a favorite one. I would love to see, and it's part in your part of the world as well, a way of getting a cut from the revenue earned from my data to me. In other words, right now, I mean, rev shares, the internet runs on rev shares, and the only people that never get a share of the rev are the people, Mark Zuckerberg gets richer and richer, and the users of Facebook, they get a perfectly nice service, but they don't get anything. We don't even get loyalty points. You don't even get frequent flyer miles.
You get the Facebook feed.
Well, I mean, so I think, that you should, there's somebody, if somebody had a business model that cut the user in for something, at least just, a toaster every year or something, I would be more inclined to, use this social network rather than that one if this one gives me reward points or whatever. And so I'd like to see that, because we are, again, as somebody was pointing out, we are contributing to these things. The comments contribute. Everything is a contribution. That's why Facebook is valuable. And then Facebook takes all the money and says, thanks a lot.
Right. And you should come tomorrow to our demo, because that's the software we're building at Enliken.
Very nicely done, guys.
It's really do people get money, or do they get loyalty points?
You can't. Once you give people money, then you screw up incentives, and you end up with a thing like All Advantage, where you have server farms in China running the software, or what have you. So you have to be really careful when you're compensating people for using their data.
Question?
I think there's services like that already, or have been services like that already. For example, Blink, I think in the UK did this. Yeah. The problem with that is that if people use the service for the money, then you have the wrong audience for most of the brands. So that's kind of a thing that is not really contributing the quality that most of the services would like to have.
But what
there's lots of areas of innovation. I think that also is one, but it has to be dealt with very carefully, I think. What I just wanted to contribute to that thing is also a bit of insight into the Berlin scene. There's lots of nice startups around here, one of which I think already is here is Tweak, a favorite startup that I have. It's a movie social recommendation system, like it's Netflix, but without the streaming itself. So it's a very nice, also data-driven thing. Very cool thing to innovate around the media consumption and information thing. Then I don't know whether you know Ammon. It's also a Berlin startup, very polarized over here because it polarizes itself. So it lets user do distinct statements. Either something is very good or shit, and that's what it collects. What Facebook misses, the dislike thing, is something that is very prominently in there. And
how do you spell the name?
Sorry?
How do you spell the name?
Amen, like Christian thing. Yeah, that's just what I wanted to share.
I guess I didn't really explain. What I really meant was, I mean, I'd like to be able to have everything about me in a box, in effect, an electronic digital box that I control, and if somebody wants to look at it, they can pay me to look at it. You want to know how old I am? You want to know what I like? You want to know?
Yeah, so it's, I think that was alluded to earlier, there's a project called the Locker project that is doing essentially that, and there's various companies, I think Enliken is going in that direction, but there's also a company called Singly that is trying to monetize your personal information and basically create an interface that will communicate with services, and it will basically, there will be a transaction occurring at the time they want to get your information. You know, so at the minimum, you'll be able to control it.
I mean, the problem is you don't have liquidity, and you can't securitize anything which doesn't have sort of common attributes. So you can't actually go out there and sell your data very easily now.
Because like the supermarkets track that. I mean, that's why they have the loyalty programs, is to know exactly what you bought all the time. But again, then now they use that. I get some rewards from that in the sense that they give me discounts on things. But it's still not the same as actually, other kinds of transactions where you get nothing.
I think we're getting close to the, are there more, do we have, one, are there more questions? Two, do we have time for them? No and no? Okay, wonderful. So please join me in thanking our panel very much.